Hello, welcome to Emotional Badass, where Moxie meets mindful. I'm your host, Nikki Eisenhower, life coach and psychotherapist. And on today's episode, Lashing Out, a conversation from the therapist's perspective with Crystal Catalina. Hello, welcome. I am here again with Crystal Catalina, my soul care coach for Emotional Badass, and we are going to have a lovely chat today. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
Yay, I'm glad to have you because I want to talk about something that I think is tricky to talk about, but very useful to talk about. I've wanted to talk more about what it's like to be in this therapist seat, in this coaching seat, and the wisdom that is sometimes hard learned, but the perspective that we get when we work with a lot of clients, I think gives us insight into the human condition in ways that are really hard in personal life to recreate. I know that it's helped me deal with my own family childhood trauma and realize what boundaries I need in the world by dealing with the reality. And it's a hard reality that sometimes as a therapist, clients show their worst behavior. They have reactions. They lash out. And I want to talk about what that experience has been like for you so that we can really share that with our listeners.
Oh, I'm really excited for this topic because it's not something that's talked about enough. I think it kind of shines a light on our humanness in the process of being a role model or leader or guide in this journey. But while at the same time, we are still human. And I think it's an interesting perspective for other people to hear our perspective on this.
Yes. And we're empaths and we're therapists and we're coaches. Most of the people listening are highly sensitive. A lot are empaths. And I do believe that one of the burdens that empaths come to me with and highly sensitive people come to me with is, why are people lashing out at me? Like, is it me? Is it them? What do I do with that? How do I manage that? It's a big part of why I teach boundaries. And it's tricky stuff to figure out. Very early in my career, I had a client and I was working in addiction. And I walked into working in addiction and being fresh and green out of college, like, woohoo, I am going to help people. Yay. Like, this is going to be so great because they want help and we're going to come together. We're going to do this thing. And I landed in addiction where I hadn't intended because of a lot of Hurricane Katrina chaos. I just had to kind of take a placement and that's where I landed. And very early on, one of my clients, full bore, tried to get me fired, like just had a reaction to me. He complained about me. He went up the ranks. He really tried to get me fired. And if I had been working for anybody else, I might have been fired. But my boss was smart enough and savvy enough to really make it a therapeutic process. So it was such a learning experience for me. And he got both of us in our office and basically looked at him. And for me, it was a real moment of somebody having my back. And I can look back and go, oh, that was rare for me at the time. So I expected to be thrown under the bus. I expected to not be able to really properly defend myself. I felt really sheepish. My anxiety was level 10. And my boss looked at this client that was in his 50s. I was in my 20s. He did not want me to be his counselor. And he just said, Nikki's a really good counselor. And she's got a lot of integrity. This anger has to come from somewhere else. And that man insisted for, I don't even know how long, that nope, it was about me. He tried to list wrong things I had done. And my boss just sat there and went, sorry, your reaction's too big. You've only known her a week. This is you. Who does Nikki remind you of?
Wow.
And he hemmed and hawed and finally admitted, Nikki looks just like my first wife. we worked it out. And that man wound up coming to my group for years to tell other recovering addicts, hey, this is how much of an ass I was basically coming into treatment with my big giant ego. I tried to get Nikki fired. So I'd bring him to my groups to talk it through. And he had to admit that it really was a big reaction. And he tried so hard to not make it about his own reaction and to make it about me. So from the beginning, I have had this awareness of we've really got to find this line, not just professionally in the therapeutic environment, but in our personal worlds. When somebody is coming at us, we need to have the check-in of, did I do something? What part of this is mine? But sometimes the answer is, no, I didn't do anything wrong, and it's not mine. And we have to learn as responsible people how to not be so overly responsible that we walk right into blame and shaming ourselves and taking responsibility for things that aren't ours to take responsibility for. This past year in the boundaries course, I used it in real time, and I've done this before, and I commit to doing it again, that it's inevitable when I bring a big group of people together that somebody's going to lash out. It's just inevitable. It's like numbers, somebody is I'm going to look like their first wife, like I am going to hit some kind of button for them, or the way I say something is going to hit some kind of button. And most people out there are not cognizant of the fact that when somebody hits their button, it's your job to manage that button and how it got pushed. It's not necessarily the other person's fault. I think more and more because of politics in the last few years, the last 5 years, for sure, the last decade, there has been this language, this pushing of you're not allowed to offend me. And that makes it real tricky to navigate these waters. This past year, I read the letter that I got, the email that I got that was basically offended at the boundaries that I laid out for the class. And because they were offended, they attacked me. They attacked me as a bad teacher, a terrible coach, not a good therapist, that I don't really care about highly sensitive people or their feelings, that my course was crappy. It was terrible. It was laid out wrong. And so I read this to show the group members what happens. And they could very much see, we can see it when somebody's not coming at us and is coming at somebody else and we witness it. We really can see, oh, wow. And the class could see the person tried to shame me, attack me, didn't take any responsibility for the fact that I said no refunds, threatened me if I didn't give a refund. I did not give them a refund as per my policy. So we don't, like the United States says, we don't negotiate with terrorists. I sort of take that stance too. And so she was really using her energy to terrorize me, to shame me, to try to control me into doing what she wanted, give her a refund and make me feel bad about who I am and what I present. So counseling to me has given me an opportunity to have enough people come at me to give me the opportunity to really cultivate not taking things personally and being able to be in support of myself in those moments in ways that's helped me better do that in my personal life. And that's why I wanted to do this episode today, because I think that's a really hard experience to get outside of this profession. Some of my hairstylists get it because they work with people scheduling very similar to how we do. And when you deal with the public, you start to realize that there are personalities, there are patterns that people have that attack. And I think it's really hard if you're not in a service industry to have that lesson put in front of your face, basically. What's that been like for you?
It's been interesting for me, for sure. I, similarly to you, was in the space of working with a population with addictions right out of grad school. And being in that type of environment is almost like being thrown right in the trenches immediately.
It is, because not everybody there wants help. And that was really shocking to me. Like, oh, I'm supposed to help you and you're giving me the middle finger. How are we supposed to do this if you don't want to be here, but you've been forced to be here by your job or your family or the legal system? What a conundrum.
Absolutely. And you can tell the difference eventually, of who really wants to be there and who doesn't, because it's how they're showing up and how they're doing the work. But being in that kind of environment, you get exposed. I got exposed to all the full spectrum of personalities within this like spectrum of patterns of addiction. And it was really challenging because I was running groups and I was doing individual sessions. And there was quite a bit of pushback on how I was choosing to run things. You know, it was within the federal government system. I was at the VA hospital. So another level up in the type of structure and infrastructure,
bureaucracy that gets in the way of us being able to do this, what I think of as an art form, like hard to do art therapeutically when there's like a hall monitor feeling of following rules that may not fit the situation, the person, the temperaments, the energy, all of it.
Absolutely. Now, I did feel like the system had my back. They were much more well-versed in this population than I was, fresh out of school. And I really did feel like they had my back. So I had a similar experience as you with that. I had one guy who was like writing letters to me through sending them to the VA hospital with my name on it and just saying
like F
really
you or
things.
I love you. Like what kind of inappropriateness there?
F you.
Okay.
Uh-huh. And I just marched all of those letters to my, higher ups. So that, and they had my back. But he was basically required to come in. And then I advocated for him to get a higher level of care. And he was not happy with where I sent him. And really, it was the only place that would accept him. It's not like we have a lot of choices in government, So, yeah. But the thing is I was technically his case manager. So after he came out of that treatment center, he was supposed to come back to me as well. So I was working toward, figuring out a plan for him for once he came back, because I was a little scared that he might attack me, follow me, like who knows? So he was trying to convince me to switch him to another facility, to transfer him to another facility, which simply is not allowed. And he didn't have any grounds for the transfer. So the government is not going to pay for that.
And part of dealing with addiction, if you're out there struggling with addiction, this is universal for anybody struggling with any kind of addiction. There is a certain amount of surrender. It's like your own thinking and choices got you into an addictive place. If you use that same thinking to try to get you out of that place, it's not going to work. Mm. So there's a certain balance there about being able to sort of let go and allow a different consciousness, a different intelligence to guide some of your choices. And it is outside of your comfort zone. There's so much in addiction recovery that's about you letting go of control. And so as we make treatment team recommendations and coordinate care, it's sort of a perfect petri dish for someone's control issues and ego to push back and go, no, I don't want to do that. I think that's stupid. I don't need any more care. You're wrong. And sort of have this fight, because that addictive logic part of the mind is basically losing control. And it's being guided towards having less and less and less control or input from the life. And that's why I call these things gremlins, because they fight to be fed. They fight to stay. So in that moment of going to the next level of treatment, the next treatment center, that's sort of a idealized moment for that gremlin to poke its head out and start some drama, start some resistance. That inner adolescent, y'all hear me talk about a lot. You don't know what I need. F you. I know what I need. And so it's a balance of, yes, becoming your own authority figure, but when you know that you're clearing out logic either from dysfunctional childhood or from developed addiction or from chaotic living or from super grief or super depression, you got to be real with yourself about where your thinking is. But it's hard. If you're a new therapist out there it's hard to be green and feel those forces, particularly if you come out of a family that had a lot of rage and a lot of shame, because it hits our buttons as therapists too.
Yes. And I was like, I almost felt like I was failing him, not because I wasn't giving him what he wanted, but because I didn't feel successful in helping him to shift his perspective. Like, how can I help him to see that this really is what's best for him? But it's like I was taking on too much responsibility again.
And that's why boundaries work is so important and is a continuous work. It really is a continuous work. It's part of why even though every year I'm like, maybe I'll take a year off this year. Every year I'm like, no, boundaries again, because we really need it. And every personality, every situation that we're in really challenges us in some similar ways, but in some different ways, meeting ourselves in the very moment. We need those emotional boundaries that allow somebody else to be who they are. And sometimes in their bad behavior, just like we're going to be in bad behavior sometimes, we're going to stick our foot in our mouth. We're going to trip up. We're going to be in a bad mood. The perfect storm of things is going to come and sort of slap us like wave after wave after wave before we get our footing. We're all imperfect human beings. We're all flawed. But there really is something about understanding this dynamic of when somebody comes after you, they come at you verbally, aggressively. Now I'm seeing it done with sort of social justice topics too, where I see people attacked. If you don't think how I think about it, attack. And that's been sort of glorified and encouraged. And it breaks my heart seeing it happen and seeing it encouraged, because nobody's going to get to healthiness or to peace or to really respecting their own humanity or somebody else's if that's what they think is a right response, or rather is not a response and is a reactive reaction to difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's about it's about regulation and responding instead of reacting. And I do feel responsible in that role. It's important for me to not react in the ways that my humanity might initially react when I'm being attacked.
How long do you think it took you to learn how to do that? Because what's coming up for me right now are the years that I knew not to react in my head knowledge, but my body wasn't on board yet. So the feelings flooding through my body and my system were like level 12 danger while trying to sit and not react and be able to come up with a proper response, as much for myself as for the person across from me.
Yeah.
How long do you think it has taken you just in this one precious life to get to a place where your body understands more of that it's okay to really be grounded and present and not activated into fight or flight?
That is such a great question. So I finished my graduate degree in 2018, and we're sitting here March 2023, and I'm still working on it. Really, if I'm being honest, I'm getting better and better every day, every instance, every time. I think a new level up for me that I'm working through is, when I was at the VA, I didn't have any control over the individuals that I worked with. They were just assigned to me. And now in this coaching space, I do have some level of discernment of whether or not I feel like a client is a good fit for this type of work and this type of container, this type of healing space. And when it comes at me now, I still get this like level of shock and almost, again, this level of I'm checking in on my responsibility of like, ooh, what did I miss? Was there something in the intake where that I didn't necessarily pick up on? and maybe they weren't ready for this level of care. So I'm still working through that too.
I think it's important for listeners to hear you share that. I think it's easy to slide into an expectation of ourselves, especially when we have high standards for ourselves, that we would be able, that healing would somehow mean, maybe this is our inner child with his or her perfect idealism that says, eventually, if I do my work the right way, I should be able to feel completely neutral when someone attacks me in such a way. And that is such an irrational belief. Like, it is definitely going to take an energy when someone is upset around us. It's not that we're trying to be completely Switzerland, like completely 100% neutral, but we want to learn how to stay grounded sort of to the spot, like grounded to the earth and not lose ourselves. We want to be able to breathe and keep our nervous system calm and centered. We also have to learn, if we had a rageful parent, how to allow people to express their intensity when we're not really in danger physically. So there's a lot of factors playing in. I think it takes years and years and a lifetime, because each person and each person's energy in each moment holds so much that we have to be really, I want to say, generous with ourselves about that process. You know, you get a client or somebody coming at you that sounds like your dad. I get somebody that looks and sounds like my mom. That definitely happened to me when I worked for other people. And wow, did it throw me not having really the empowerment to say, you know what? Not this client. This one can work with someone else. Like, there's a growth edge, but I don't have to blast through my growth edge. I want to lean into and stretch at my growth edge. And that's a little too far. So I do think entrepreneurship in this field gives us more empowerment to be able to make those choices. Whereas working for a company or another entity, you're giving some of that power away, is the reality. And most people are going to come out of school for this profession and work for someone else. So just know that if that's really hard for you, that may guide part of where you go in this profession, whether it's working for others or crafting something that can really be more true to giving you the power to decide who and what and when you're taking people on.
You articulated that beautifully. And, you know, having clients like my dad, going back to that, you know, it's another level up for me, because my initial autopilot, my initial reaction is, you know, when someone is screaming at me because my dad was explosive, is to just kind of shrink and not advocate for myself. So it is about not being reactionary and explosive back in like defensiveness, and also not shrinking and not advocating for who I am as a professional, who I am as a coach, a therapist, all of those things. It's like really walking the middle line and showing up the best I can and modeling for them. I mean, it's almost like, you know, a toddler having a tantrum in front of you. No, you don't want to scream back at them and model exactly what they're doing.
That's such a big point that you're making.
Yeah.
Y'all hear me talk about the inner child all the time. I think if we can walk the world understanding that when someone has a temper tantrum at us, they're not in their full adult self. They might be trying to be, like, if they're in their inner adolescent. You know, we all have that stage in inner adolescence where we're too big for our britches. We think we know it all. And that's a part of our psyche. Nobody's going to tell me nothing is, you know, the vibe of my inner adolescent. And so if we can understand, not just the therapists in the world, but the sensitive people in the world, that when someone lashes out and comes at us in that kind of verbal attacking mode, if we can really understand, oh, their inner child is at the helm, then we do a better job taking care of ourselves in this moment to help ourselves stay grounded and rooted and not shrink and take up space, hold our heads up high, be in our adult bodies instead of going into our own childhood bodies. And if you look at whether it's, trash TV, or we can look back at our own lives, if you really look back at arguments you've had, the drama moments, almost universally, almost 100%, I would bet all the money in my savings that somebody shows up in their inner child. It triggers the other person's inner child. Then there's two children fighting. And we wonder at the end of that, we don't even know why we started fighting, what the point was. Did anybody win? Did anybody lose? Everybody lost. Like, what is going on here? And so if we can walk the world understanding, it will help us stay in our adult bodies. Because if an actual 4-year-old comes up and says, "You're a big stupid head," "I hate your guts," it's like, you let it roll off, because on every level, not to take that personally and not to take that seriously. You give that grace to that 4-year-old, which winds up being a grace for yourself. When we can do that with the adults, when their inner child is triggered, I do think that's a big part of, if there's a trick to managing this, that's the trick.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And it just reminded me of the analogy, like, if you are afraid of speaking in public, see everyone in the audience naked.
Yes.
It's just like, see that adult as their wounded inner child is coming forward.
Which is sort of like taking them down a couple pegs in our psyche. Because when we're little, if we had a rageful parent, for you, it was your dad. For me, it was my mom. They weren't 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall. They were 40 feet tall. When my mom was screaming at me, she might as well have been Godzilla.
Right.
So when we shrink and get small and little and go into that little body, it's like we're also not realizing that we're giving this sort of big giant energy to, whether it's that big crowd that we're supposed to speak in front of, or whether it's this angry person in front of me. Instead of, I can see the little child or the baby in you that's just screaming and just having a hard time today. And I don't have to feel activated by that.
Yes.
And y'all, these things that I'm saying, this isn't an idea that I had and then it clicked in. This is why I wanted to do this episode, because I hope that some of you stop giving yourself such a hard time about why it's such an energy drain, or why it hurts so much, or why you can't get over it in a snap when somebody comes after you. I feel blessed by the gift of having client after client for 17 years to give me the opportunity to practice not taking those moments personally. And it's made a world of difference in my personal life. I hope this episode encourages those of you listening to walk your world, own your stuff, but to stay in your adult body if somebody comes after you that way. Right, wrong, or otherwise. Maybe they make some good points, but it's in the coming at. Do you have a better way to describe that? That's my best way of that. Somebody coming at me. Do you have a different way?
It is someone coming at you. It's someone coming at me in either in session or after services rendered, or, making claims that are obviously not true and still make me second guess myself. I'll be like, let me just check in on that. Is there truth in what they're saying? I also think about, in the spiritual sense, like, what did I do to attract this situation? What is this? What lesson is this trying to bring forward for me?
I love that question. That was a hard one for me for a long time, because I think moment to moment, I would really take that with a heaviness. Like, what is it about me that called this in?
I think a lot of empaths take that heaviness in. It's like, well, I've been doing all this work on me, and why am I still attracting being attacked?
Yes. Like it's a, if I'm doing my healing right, this wouldn't happen.
Yes.
And that, again, I think that's the inner child going, I'm trying so hard to do everything right. I feel so powerless here, and wanting that responsibility. If I'm doing it right, this won't happen. That's a false sense of, I have the control to not make other people come at me. It's a sneaky place where the people pleasing pops up.
Yes.
Because codependence, we're in recovery for codependency. secretly we're trying to manage and control everybody's feelings for the greater good. That's what we tell ourselves, for the greater good. But we are trying to manipulate and manage other people's feelings until we are more aware and do some healing around this codependent dynamic. So there's a whole lot in terms of allowing somebody to be in their upset, their tantrum, and not try to adjust it. It's like, yeah, they're going to tantrum. How long are they going to tantrum? Till they're done. When I've had that happen in session, I said, do you have anything else in there that you want to get out? Like, get it all out. Like,
I love that.
Anything else? You sure? I could probably suck at a few more things. Why don't you tell me? And sometimes that person, because they feel heard and they're coming down for being triggered, sometimes that person will offer me an apology. Sometimes I have to have follow-up sessions of, hey, your inner adolescent came out and was really aggressive and abusive. This is what happens in your personal life. Because this is not okay no matter how you feel. And sometimes that's been some of the most powerful work I've been able to do with people. And the truth is that if you're a highly sensitive person or an empath and you have a big fighter in you, because a fighter needed to develop as part of your response, that fighter may come out and really sabotage relationships in your life that really have your back. Because we tend to lash out at people who are safer, not people who are less safe. That means people that we trust to really be in the mix with us, to not leave us. It's one of those paradoxes of the human experience. My parents who have gone through divorce, if another parent kind of goes MIA, the parent who stays, the parent who does the nitty-gritty parenting, gets a lot of the backlash. The other parent gets, yay, vacation mode, Disneyland moments, and you're doing the nitty-gritty. That does not feel fair. So is there anything else you want to add? Because I think I'm going to add some journal prompts to kind of take this dynamic further.
Yeah, I don't think there's any more I want to add. I mean, I have more examples, but they don't feel relevant. I feel like we've covered everything in the examples.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah. So let's talk about how to take this further so that you can explore how to use this. Okay. One of the big reframes is these things aren't happening to me, they're happening for me. This is where I was going earlier. In the moment of these things happening, I think it's really hard, especially at first, to understand that it may be happening for you because, wow, does it feel terrible. Now that I can look back and I'm out of the energy of those moments, I very much can see and believe with every fiber of my being that has been such a gift. These friction moments show up for us in life to wear off our edges, to sand off our edges. And if we can embrace that, it helps the sticky, vulnerable, difficult emotion moments become valuable instead of burdensome and just draining and bad and really pointless other than for the badness. So I really look at these moments now as they come. I've trained myself into going, this is going to be good for me. I don't have to like this moment. But this is another opportunity where I get to practice staying rooted to the spot. Like Crystal said earlier, not shrinking, showing up in my big body. And sometimes just standing there in the face of that wave of aggression, of that wave of shame, is such a huge growth moment. So in terms of journaling, is there somebody in your life that pushes this kind of button, that shows up with this kind of energy? How might you use the experience of them in the world with you to help you grow past this, to help you stay in your adult self, to stay rooted and grounded despite that funky energy being thrown your way?
I think it'd be helpful to consider, what can I do in those moments that I am interacting with that identified person, or even if it's an unidentified person that comes along later down the line that we don't know yet, out of the blue. What can I do to stay in my inner wise woman while someone else's inner child is showing up, is lashing out?
I love that question, because our anxiety really benefits from having something to do in that moment. And if we don't plan for that moment and we start to get triggered, our best thinking flies out the window. So that's a great journal prompt. Thank you, Crystal. I'm thinking very simple too, like just taking a breath. Even just acknowledgement. Okay, somebody's attacking me. Like it's happening. Just the acknowledgement can be huge in terms of grounding yourself.
Absolutely, because there's so much power in that pause. The pause of acknowledgement, pause of awareness.
Those of you that are conflict avoidant, what would it be like to explore that in journaling? How does it benefit you to avoid conflict? Because very often it's very smart to avoid conflict, but we can't avoid all conflict. So where do you give yourself permission to really practice conflict so that you can get better at it? Because if we avoid it constantly, how the hell you ever get better at it? So that could be a permission prompt. Where will you allow conflict? Where will you lean in? Thank you so much for sitting with me today and having a chat to go out to all of our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for bringing this topic to the table. It's really, really helpful. I had a recent incident with a client. So this is healing me as we are helping to heal others as well.
You're very welcome, madam. I want to thank Crystal for spending time with me and having these deep, vulnerable, open conversations. I am currently on a wait list. If you are looking for one-on-one coaching, Crystal is open and accepting new clients. If you would like to book with her now, book with her at emotionalbadass.com/coaching. I'm an emotional badass. You're an emotional badass. And together we are where Moxie meets mindful. Light and love, and I'll see you right here next time with a brand new episode. Take care. Bye-bye.